But you know what I got to thinking about the other day when I was out here looking at these onions? When we don't have onions available around here and I go to the grocery store to buy onions. What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope all y'all are having an awesome day. It is Wednesday, March 26th here in South Georgia. And on today's video, I'm going to give you a little update on our bulbing onions. And we're going to talk about if there's anything we can do at this point to make them bigger. So as I've told you several times in the past, to be able to grow some nice onions, you really have to understand how onions grow. Understanding those two phases of growth is crucial to being able to grow some nice onions. Now, it doesn't look like we're going to grow any monster onions this year, and I think that has a lot to do with just how many freezing nights we had in the fall into the winter. Just took them a little while to get going, but let me show you where ours are at right now. So as you can see from these pretty little jewels sitting on top of the soil there, we are currently in the bulbing phase. Now, the bulbing is farther along on some varieties than it is others. This DP Sweet variety tends to be the earliest of the ones I plant. So we've got some little, almost baseball sized onions sitting on top of the dirt there. For these other varieties, we're really not seeing those big bulbs above the soil yet. The ground's just starting to crack on some of these others. That tells us that bulbing has began. So when the bulbing phase starts, the vegetative phase ends. That means once these things start bulbing, once you start seeing that ground cracking around the onion plant, this thing starts to enlarge, you're not growing any more onion leaves. The leaves are done growing. This plant is putting all its energy into enlarging this bulb here. So each one of these leaves on this onion plant here represents a ring on this onion. The more leaves we're able to grow, the more rings we've got on the onion, the bigger the onion will get. And that's how we knew we probably weren't going to make any massive onions this year, because we just didn't grow enough leaves on these plants. In years past, when we have grown monster onions, we've got plants with just huge amounts of foliage on them, just toppling all over the place. And so that's why I like to refer to that vegetative phase as the investment phase. That's when you have to really invest in those onions, feed them well, get them to grow as many leaves as you can so you get as many rings as you can. Now, obviously we can't do anything about the weather, but hopefully that concept makes sense to you. You're trying to grow as many leaves as you can to get as many rings as you can. But as you can see, we didn't grow that many leaves, so there's not a whole lot we can do at this point. We can't go back in time, grow out more leaves. Doesn't matter how much we fertilize these onions right now, they're not going to make more leaves. However, there are some things we can do to get the most out of these leaves that we did grow, to grow the biggest onion we can grow given the leaves we made. So the things we can do at this stage in the game to help our onion plants out, one would be make sure they've got plenty of water. Don't ever let that soil dry out during the bulbing phase. We've been getting a decent amount of rain lately, but I've also been running my drip irrigation. We want to make sure these things got plenty of water so those rings can get as big as they can get. Number two, at this stage in the game, you really want to try to keep the weeds to a minimum. Now, that can be tough to do at this point, especially if you've got a lot more foliage than I got. Onions can be tough to weed with all those leaves in the way. That's why it's important to kind of stay on top of it early. But you want to keep those weeds to a minimum. We're starting to get some pigweed now. A lot of those weeds can just suck the water out of this soil here. We want all that water to go to our onions, not to the weeds. And point number three, which kind of ties back into point number one with the water, we want to minimize the stress on these onion plants at this stage in the game. Now, obviously, we can't control temperature fluctuations, but we can control the water stress somewhat. So we want to make sure these plants don't get stressed. We don't want them to flower too early. We want them to grow to their maximum potential. And we don't want these bulbing onions to produce flowers, because typically onions that go to seed or flower don't store very well. And flowering or bolting on onions could be caused by several different things. One of those being temperature stress, especially this time of year when it might be cool one night and then get really warm the next day, and it's fluctuating back and forth, kind of throws those onion plants for a loop sometimes and makes them go to seed. And as I mentioned earlier, water stress could also cause it. If that onion plant is water deprived, that plant's going to be thinking, well, this is the end of the road. I need to go ahead and produce these seeds so I can pass my genes to the next generation. But probably the most determining factor I have found when it comes to onions flowering early is variety. Some varieties are really prone to it, others are not. And that's one of the main reasons I grow the varieties that I grow. Yes, they usually make pretty decent sized onions for us, but these varieties I have found are less prone to flowering early. That doesn't mean they won't do it, they're just less likely to do it. So we're not going to have a home run or record onion year this go around, but if this DP Sweet variety, this earlier variety, is any indication, I think these other varieties are going to end up making some decent size onions. Looks like our average this year is going to be right around baseball size, maybe a little smaller. Now, growing baseball size onions isn't as fun as growing softball size onions or trying to grow a 3-pound onion. But you know what I got to thinking about the other day when I was out here looking at these onions? When we don't have onions available around here and I go to the grocery store to buy onions, I don't seek out those huge onions. So when I actually have to go buy onions, I usually buy onions about this size or a little bit bigger because they're so much easier to cut up. I don't ever go to the grocery store and find the biggest onions and put those in a sack. I always usually buy a sack of these smaller baseball size onions because they're easier to cut up, and a lot of times I don't need that much onion at one time. Now, that's not an excuse, and I'll probably still try to grow some monster onions next year, but it was just interesting to think about that. I don't buy huge onions like that. Why am I trying to grow huge onions like that? And while we're on the subject of onions, I figured I'd give you an update on some of these perennial onion varieties we've got growing. Our Louisiana evergreen shallot jungle here, starting to show a bunch of flowers. Now, it's okay for these perennial onions to flower. We don't want those bulbing onions to flower, but it's a natural part of the process with these here. We'll simply cut off those flower heads, and these will grow a little bit more. Once they start getting hot, they'll die back, and that's when we'll harvest the bulbs. But you can see down there from one bulb we planted, shoot, I bet we've got close to 20 plants there in that cluster. Now, for whatever reason, the dog likes to get in there and waller, so that may impact our production in a few spots here. Not too bad. I don't know why she likes to do that. But anyways, we should have a pretty decent harvest of bulbs here. A good amount to put on our website, trying to keep up with the demand because we sell out of these so fast every year. Now, in this row here, we have several different varieties planted. Some of these have been sent to me. One of them I purchased a couple years ago. This Florida Finley onion, this is my second time planting this one, and it does okay, but it just hasn't done that great for me. It doesn't make any sense. You would think something from Florida would do great here, but I just haven't seen the growth out of these that I would expect so far. Maybe just not the right time of year for them, I don't know, but they don't really do like those over there do, or at least they haven't yet. Now, this Ikakai onion, which I believe is from Hawaii, maybe, hope I got that right. Anyway, this one looks pretty impressive. It's growing really well and dividing out like it should. And these Maria's Guatemalan perennial leeks, not a ton of growth on those, but they're starting to look pretty cool. I'm interested to see how these progress as we get into the summer. And lastly, in this row, these white potato onions, these are ones I saved over from last year. These potato onions aren't supposed to do that great down here, but I had some that made it through last year. The rest of them just completely died back. So I don't know, maybe we've got a little tough strain here we're working with, and we'll see how these persist, and if all of them make it, then we'll keep planting more of them. And then over here in the raised bed, this white Welsh perennial onion is probably my second favorite at the moment, just slightly behind Louisiana evergreen shallots. We split these up late last year, I believe, maybe last fall. Planted individual ones in here. You can see just how much they've grown. Most of them have divided into 7 plants per bundle or bunch there. Got a lot of nice flower heads on these. Bees have been tearing these things up. And I'm gonna see if we can harvest some seeds off these this year. See if we can propagate them by seeds. We know we can propagate them by division. So we'll see if we can do it by seed as well. So that concludes our State of the Onion address today. If your onions are already bulbing like mine, like I said, not a whole lot you can do, but there are a few things you can do to help maximize the size of your onions. If you've just planted your onions or they're still in the vegetative phase, make sure you try to grow as many leaves as possible. And as always, you can find the varieties we like to grow around here on our website at lazydogfarm.com. And if you want to hear some more good onion tips, watch this video right here where we break down our top 10 onion growing tips. So check that out, and we'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.